Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about Enemy at the Gates, which came out in 2001. This is a film directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud, written by Jean-Jacques Annaud and Alain Godard. It's based on the book Enemy at the Gates, The Battle for Stalingrad by William Craig, which came out in 1973. The film follows a fictionalized version of a real Soviet sniper who served during the Battle of Stalingrad in the winter of 1942 to 43, and it's available on Sky Showtime in the Netherlands. I had to sail the high seas again this week. What did you think of this movie?
I thought it was strange. Strange is my summary of this movie. Just one word. Just strange. That's not all I want to say. I thought it was interesting to see Jude Law and Rachel Weisz as literal babies in this movie. And I was just telling you before we started recording that this movie didn't really feel like a World War II movie to me, even though it's set during World War II and there's clearly a war going on. They could have done with a little bit more context for me to kind of get more of a sense of the war. I suppose it's very much about this main character, his girlfriend, his friend, and this one other sniper. So, now that I think about it, maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's not all that's in there. But as you can tell, I'm sort of conflicted about this film. How about you?
It feels very early 2000s, big box office blockbuster to me. Like the love triangle feels kind of Pearl Harbor-y. Yeah, you don't get a lot of context, which is kind of unfortunate because I think in the West, there's potentially a lot less broad popular knowledge about the Eastern Front. And so it was cool to get to see this movie and use it as an opening to dive into that a little bit more. But I don't feel like the movie gave you a lot of context that might have been helpful in understanding what was going on and what the stakes were, etc. I did like to see that there was a female character with something to do, and I think the set was pretty impressive. I mean, Stalingrad really got the shit bombed out of it, and the fighting was very bloody. We're talking about people fighting street to street, house to house, room to room sometimes. There was occasions where the Russians would be on one side of the hall and the Germans would be on the other side of the hall. And so I feel like we really get this sense of like it almost looks like a post-apocalyptic landscape, and that feels really true to life. So I did like that aspect of it. But yeah, I think it's all right. I don't know that it's my favorite history movie that I've seen.
You make a good point because they do show you a lot of war and like warfare, but I wish they'd kind of maybe given us, the audience, a little bit more about the significance of Stalingrad and that sort of stuff. I don't know if I just missed it or if it wasn't in there.
No, there wasn't a lot. And I don't know if they thought maybe because they were focusing so tightly on the main characters that maybe it wasn't super relevant, so that wasn't necessary for the audience. And maybe we just want that context because we like history. I don't know.
Because we're nerds. Yes. No, I agree. Maybe that's why. You did a lot of the legwork here, but can you take our listeners through a little background of the Battle of Stalingrad?
Yes, I will give you the context that Enemy at the Gates did not give you. Hitler broke the non aggression pact with the Soviet Union and invaded in June of 1941. We've talked about this before, Operation Barbarossa. This was catastrophic for the Soviets. I mean, it's hard to overstate how unprepared they were. The Germans advanced very quickly. The Russians almost lost Moscow. However, they did manage to hold on, and this forced Hitler to shift his primary target to the Caucasus oil fields. The gateway to the Caucasus was Stalingrad. This was a major industrial center. It gave whoever held it control over the River Volga as a transport passage, as well as access to the oil fields. And we've talked about this a little bit in our ex-company episodes about how crucial of a resource oil was during World War II. The Battle of Stalingrad was the bloodiest battle of World War II and maybe the bloodiest battle in history. There were between 800,000 and 1.5 million casualties on the Axis side and 1.3 million on the Russian side. It's kind of difficult to tell because there was just such a staggering loss of life. It marked a real turning point in the war because the Germans lost their entire 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army, and it really put them on the defensive in Russia. The Soviets went on to win the Battle of Kursk the following summer in 1943, and as we know, they basically continued their advance until they reached Berlin in the spring of 1945. So we're right in the middle of this huge clash of empires between Germany and Russia at the point that this movie is taking place.
And it's a super long battle. I see you've corrected me in the length of it. I thought it was 5 months, but it's closer to 7 months. So more than half a year. Imagine. People were starving, people were not having a good time.
But yeah, I mean, there was a part of the battle, I will get into this, but where the Germans were surrounded and they ate all the horses. That's the point that they were at. Guys were eating 2 ounces of bread a day and a bowl of watery soup, and maybe a can of meat if the supply drop came in. That is not enough food for a grown-ass man to live on, and a lot of people starved to death.
And then also having to fight in very poor conditions. It's not great.
For sure. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for that refresher. If you want to hear the other episode where we talked about the oil fields, it's called Ballad of a Soldier, if you want to look for that. And with that said, I think we should get into the plot of this movie. The film opens with the young boy being taught how to shoot by his grandfather somewhere in the Ural Mountains. And this is our main character, just younger than we see him later.
There is a story about the real Vasily Zaitsev. That's the name of the young boy who is going to grow up and we're going to follow in this movie, supposedly shooting a wolf and killing it with one shot when he was a child. I don't know if it's apocryphal, but this scene seems kind of loosely based on that.
It's interesting because it comes back later in the movie, in a nightmare or a dream. And in the opening scene, we don't see him succeed to shoot the wolf. He actually fails, and the wolf eats their horse, and his grandpa has to save him. So, interesting opening scene.
Yeah, and actually, now that I think about it, there are a lot of elements in Zaitsev's memoir that people think are perhaps embroidered or exaggerated or were propaganda by the Soviet government. And it's interesting to me that we get this opening scene where we don't see if he hits the wolf or not. And so we maybe get a certain impression of his ability and his marksmanship and him being a stone cold killer at 8 years old or whatever. And then later in the movie, we find out that that's not really what happened and that he was not successful. And so I don't know if the filmmakers intended this, but it's kind of interesting to compare that to the story of the real Zaitsev and what might be true and what might not be true.
And also, I guess the story in the movie, which is completely based on propaganda, because Zaitsev ends up being used as this, like, iconic hero to spur on the Soviets. So it's a very interesting parallel, come to think of that.
Yeah. In September of 1942, Vasily Zaitsev is now a grown man, played by Jude Law, and he's a soldier in the Red Army.
Grown man is debatable, was what was going to say.
Apparently, Jude Law went on, what did he call it? He called it the Red Army diet, I think, and he lost like 12 kilos to play this role so that he could look like someone who hadn't been eating enough food.
Sounds kind of dangerous.
Yeah. Well, anyway, people were doing a lot of that. Yeah, he's a soldier in the Red Army. He finds himself on the front lines of the Battle of Stalingrad. Initially, we see him on a train with other soldiers, and he's coming into town, and he's kind of launched directly into the battle that is raging. Nikita Khrushchev, played by Bob Hoskins, wearing a nose prosthetic, if I'm not mistaken, orders the city to be held at all costs. And Stalingrad as a city stands in ruins. We can see it burning on the far shore in absolute shambles as neither army is willing to retreat.
Yeah, can I just say the opening scene? Well, not the opening scene, the first scene in which we see Jude Law where these soldiers are being moved around like cattle. Like, you get an immediate sense that the Red Army was not a fun place to be at this point of the war.
Yeah. By the end of the fighting, just to give you an idea, 99% of the city was reduced to rubble. 41,000 homes had been destroyed. And out of 500,000 inhabitants, only 1,515 remained, the rest having been killed or displaced. This was the kind of battle where It pretty much got razed to the ground. And like we were saying about the film set, the film studio actually recreated Stalingrad at a Soviet army base near Berlin, and it was at the time it was the biggest film set ever built in Europe.
Neat.
The title "Enemy at the Gates" comes from an emergency Pravda article. Pravda was the newspaper that operated sort of as a function of the communist government. As the city was being invaded, they printed this emergency article. I think they only printed 500 copies, and then it was up to the soldiers that received them to kind of read it and pass it along. But in an editorial that urged calm, they stated, "We will destroy the enemy at the gates of Stalingrad."
Take a shot.
Exactly.
It is in your book as well, right?
Yes, yep.
Troops are brought to the other side of the Volga River in freight trains and are then crammed into flimsy boats and are made to cross the Volga River without any fire cover while being shot at by the Germans. So several of these boats kind of get destroyed in this attempt, and it's pretty brutal. It reminded me a little bit of that one scene in Dunkirk where they're all in, like, the mall. There's like a plane flying over shooting at them. It looks like that. And any soldiers who attempt to get away and jump into the water are shot down by their officers. So you either get killed by the Germans or you get killed by your own officers. And the docks of Stalingrad, like the city, is pretty much in shambles and it's littered with bodies and soldiers that are crippled. So it's not a very welcoming place, I would say.
Yeah, and there are some, I think, stereotypes about the Soviet army in this scene that I thought were interesting. I think this movie is perhaps a major part of why these stereotypes have been propagated and have been continued to be used in other films. So there's this idea of the Soviet soldier needing a gun at his back in order to fight. And it's true that the Soviet Union did have these units of the NKVD, which was the political branch, who were there to encourage men forward. But really, these units saw most use when it came to penal battalions. So, guys who may not necessarily want to fight, they would use these units of the NKVD to encourage people to move forward when they didn't want to. But really, they were not machine gunning guys down like you see in this movie. It was not like that. They would arrest people. There would usually be some kind of at least summary trial. And there were, of course, people who were executed for attempting to desert or for retreating when they hadn't been told they could retreat. But by and large, men were either returned to their units or put in some kind of penal battalion. So, what we're seeing in this movie is, I think, sort of an unfair stereotype that the Russians were not brave on their own and they had to be coerced into fighting for their country. There's also a part where Jude Law doesn't get a rifle because there's not enough rifles for everybody, and they're like, "Yeah, when the guy in front of you drops it because he dies, like, you pick up his rifle and keep going." And that is also not really historically accurate. The Soviet Union was actually well armed. I mean, by the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, they would target a single German soldier with an anti-tank shell because they had so much ammunition just stockpiled. So there were, of course, probably points where in the chaos of an initial battle, or perhaps when they had gathered a group of civilians to defend a factory. Like, there were scenarios, of course, maybe where they might have been short on weaponry, but the way we see it in this movie was not how it was. It's definitely a gross exaggeration.
I wonder why they oversimplified it in such a gross way. Like, it's not even just a little bit exaggerated, it's just untrue. So why
Yeah.
would they do that? I guess they're trying to make the Soviets look as bad as the Germans to the Soviets, which,
Yeah.
eh,
Yeah, interesting choice. The real Zaitsev had been in the Navy since 1937 and later requested transfer to a rifle division after the German invasion, so he was not fresh and green by any means. Him and his comrades actually they arrived on the eastern bank of the Volga River, and they did a bunch. They spent I think like 5 days practicing doing close quarters fighting because they knew that's what they would be facing on the other side of the river. So they spent a few days doing that before they actually crossed the river, and when they crossed the river, they crossed at night because of course you would cross at night, not in daytime like in the film, and they did not incur any casualties. So
hmm,
while it's probably true that some units crossed the river and, got shelled, I mean, of course it's true, I'm sure that happened, but it definitely didn't happen to Zaitsev, and he definitely didn't cross during the day because that would be suicidal.
yeah. I mean, I guess we're supposed to feel something for Jude Law at this point, so maybe that's why they gave it to him. And also, there aren't that many characters in this film, So I guess they kind of decided to make him just the receiver of every single thing that happened in Stalingrad happened to him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I guess that's what you get when, like, one movie about the Eastern Front comes out every, like, 20 years in Hollywood or whatever. So, soldiers are forced into a suicidal charge without a rifle, as we just discussed. This is not really what happened in real life, but anyway, they give Jude Law a handful of bullets and they're like, "Good luck." And the charge comes under heavy German fire from machine guns and tanks around the city. The Soviet soldiers try to retreat and they get machine gunned down by their own officers. And then both sides were doing this, by the way, this thing where they would do propaganda over loudspeakers and they would try and get the other side to surrender. So in this case, we're hearing the German loudspeakers ask Soviet soldiers to surrender by going like, "Yeah, if you come over to us, we'll actually treat you better than your own officers."
I think we've seen this before in Generation War, except that time it's the Soviets, I think, telling the Germans to join them.
Yeah, and towards the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, there was quite a lot of a pretty important member of the German army would get picked up, and then he would call his superiors who were still holding out and be like, "Hey, the Russians are being really nice to me. They're giving me food and stuff. You should definitely just surrender. Everything will be fine." Um,
I wonder.
well, of the, like, over 100,000 Germans that were taken prisoner at Stalingrad, something like 5,000 of them ever came back to Germany. A huge chunk of them died in these POW camps where the conditions were really terrible. Like, we're talking, like, cannibalism terrible. Nikita Khrushchev, who we see in this movie, he was actually the first Soviet leader to admit in his memoir that the Russians simply shot a bunch of the German POWs at Stalingrad. They never even made it to the camps.
Oops. After all this, Vasily, who's just about alive, kind of, hides among a pile of corpses, which is not the last time he will do this. While a tank shell incapacitates a car that's coming towards him, the occupant of the car is Commissar Danilov, played by Joseph Fiennes, who I really enjoy in this movie. And he takes cover in the same heap of dead people and finds a rifle. But Vasily then reveals himself and he kind of motions to the commissar not to fire until there's an explosion so they're not discovered. And Danilov then gives the rifle to Vasily, who then kills 5 German soldiers in less than a minute and saves himself and Danilov. And together they return to the Soviet base just outside of Stalingrad.
So we don't know if Danilov is 100% a real person. He did get mentioned in the Craig book briefly because he gets mentioned in Zaitsev's memoirs, but certainly if he did exist, they weren't like this whole thing didn't happen. They weren't like buddy buddy or good friends or anything like that. But there is a grain of truth because Vasily did get asked to be in a sniper group after another officer had watched him essentially take out a bunch of Germans with just a regular rifle.
Yeah, I feel like this movie oversimplifies pretty much everything and just compounds it into these characters. So maybe that's why. But I did enjoy his character, even though he turns out to be kind of a dick. But in the beginning, it was quite nice.
Yeah. Nikita Khrushchev arrives in Stalingrad to coordinate the city's defenses and demands ideas to improve morale. So he makes the old commander kill himself, and then he's got all the other commanders outside, and they're obviously all scared to death. And so he's like, "How am I gonna prove morale around here?" And the other commissars are like, "How about you kill a bunch of guys? How about you set an example?" And Danilov is like, "I have a better idea. I think people need like a positive example. I think we should tell people about heroic escapades that are happening and that'll encourage them to behave in a similar way." And that's how he brings up Vasily and he's like, "Actually, I do know this guy who's a hero and we should tell everyone about him."
Yeah, like at this point, Danilov is kind of enthusiastic and smiley and weird, but things will change.
Yeah, and I mean, he's obviously like a political officer, so he works for the party. And, you can tell that he's very enthusiastic about being like, "Hey, if I do a good job for the party, I can rise through the ranks, but that involves, like, towing the party line," kinda thing. I did think it was interesting how he talks a lot about how, for example, when he's talking about Vasily and this German guy that he's fighting against, he's like, "Yeah, it's like a classic example of class warfare." He's really talking the talk, but, he doesn't really walk the walk, He makes fun of Vasily for not being as literate as him. And later on, he uses his rank and power to make Vasily look bad when he gets mad at him. I don't know. It's just like a classic person who pretends to be diehard, but like really he's just in it for himself.
He's a puppet, is what he is.
Yeah, and just really self-involved, I think. But yeah, I wanted to note that Khrushchev, they make him look like he's running the whole show in this movie, and that's not what happened in real life. He was a political officer, and he was at the defense of Stalingrad, and he was an advisor. But the guy who really planned the defense of the city and commanded the Stalingrad front was a guy called Andrei Yeremenko, who does not appear in this movie. Yeremenko also appointed Vasily Chikov as CO of the 62nd Army. The 62nd Army are the ones who successfully held the western bank of the Volga for pretty much the duration of the fighting. So he was also a really massive figure that wasn't included. And I personally think they used Khrushchev to give Western audiences a familiar touch point because Khrushchev went on to be the leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin's death, and a lot of people have heard of him. So I think that's why they did that.
Yeah, I feel like they definitely didn't make this for the history community at all. Like, it's for general audiences very much.
Yeah, and, I listened to a podcast today called Based on a True Story, and they did an episode about Enemy at the Gates. And if you want to know more about Zaitsev and what he said in his memoirs, you should give that podcast a listen because they talk about a few stories that he specifically mentioned. But apparently, the real Vasily, he's just a regular guy, and he started to become famous because of this crazy story. So basically, the first week he was in Stalingrad, he didn't really sleep. There was not an opportunity for that. The situation was too unbelievable and too much shit was going on. So he gets super, super, super tired and he's like, I'm gonna go to sleep in this bunker. It's fully dark. And when he wakes up in the bunker and he lights a match to light a cigarette, he realizes that all the guys around him in the bunker are dead, not sleeping as he thought. So then he goes out into this like hallway and realizes that he's in basically a makeshift mass grave. Like, the Soviets have just started piling bodies down there because they don't have anywhere else to put them, and they probably thought he was dead because he was sleeping so deeply. So he manages to bust out, and he's, like, panicking because he's afraid he's gonna run out of air or whatever. So he manages to bust out, and he comes out sort of near a German machine gun nest, and the Germans haven't really seen him yet because 'cause they're not expecting a guy to come out of the mass grave. So, he throws a grenade in there and takes out the machine gun nest, and when he goes back and finds his guys, they're like, "Holy shit, dude, we thought you were dead." And then a few minutes later, they're like, "Man, we've been pinned down by this machine gun for hours. It's so weird they stopped firing." And he's like, "Oh, I got rid of it." And they were like, "Dude, you came back from the dead and then you took out a machine gun nest and saved all our lives?" And so that story started getting passed around, and that was sort of the genesis of the legend of Vasily Zaitsev.
Amazing. And also so unlikely, right? How?
I mean, again, I don't know how much of this is true because a lot of this stuff just comes from Zaitsev memoirs, but
Who knows? It's a good story, though.
it is.
Vasily is transferred to the sniper division, and he and Danilov become friends, maybe? And then they also, because this story obviously needs more drama, also both become romantically interested in a woman named Tanya, played by Rachel Weisz, who looks like a baby in this too. And she's a citizen of Stalingrad who has become a private in a local militia. Danilov has her transferred to an intelligence unit so she can be away from the battlefield, and ostensibly to make use of her German skills because she's very skilled in translating radio intercepts. You know some more about Tanya, don't you?
Yes. Tanya Chernova was a real person, but roughly nothing of what we see in the movie is true. But also, a lot of the stuff that we know about her is based on interviews that William Craig did. William Craig was the author of the book I read. And a lot of the things she said are now disputed by other historians, so I don't think we fully know the truth about her, but the broad strokes are she was studying medicine when the war broke out, and she went to Belarus and discovered that the Germans had killed her grandparents. And so she quickly became an anti Nazi partisan in basically the woods of Belarus and Ukraine, killing Germans. And she referred to the lives she took as sticks that she had broken. So she was like, "Oh, I broke this many sticks," or whatever. And by the end of her 3 months of battle in Stalingrad, she had supposedly quote unquote broken 80 sticks. And not just from being a sniper, she did all kinds of stuff. She would be sent on patrols and sneakily launch a grenade in through a window or whatever. So I'm sure she's counting all of these. But anyway, Zaitsev supposedly taught her how to become a sniper and she became part of his little group. And her having a romantic relationship with Zaitsev is mentioned in the Craig book, but she is not mentioned in Zaitsev's memoirs. So I don't know if she made that up, if that was excluded from his memoirs because it didn't look a certain way. I don't really know. Like I said, some historians have questioned her claims. There's a guy named Anthony Beaver who wrote this book called Stalingrad, which is also a huge book on the topic in the field. And he points out that women sniper units were created in 1943 but wouldn't have existed yet at Stalingrad, to which I say, this is probably still possible. There's a few one offs, right? I don't know. He's probably done more research into this than I have, but what is true is that there were over 2,000 female snipers in the Red Army. Only 500 of them survived the war, so not great odds. 800,000 women served in the Red Army, mainly in medical units, but also as pilots, snipers, machine gunners, tank crew members, and in other auxiliary roles.
That is neat. 800,000. That's so many women.
It is, but what's crazy to think about is that was like 5% of the total Russian army, because that's how many fucking people were in the Russian army.
It's easy to forget how fucking huge the Russian army was.
Yeah. The Soviet snipers are taking an increasing toll on the German forces. And so the Germans get on the horn with Major Erwin Koenig, played by Ed Harris, who is supposedly the super sniper. And he comes to Stalingrad to specifically to take out Vasily and crush Soviet morale. Because at this point, right, Vasily is pretty famous. They're publishing newspapers about him. He's like a household name in Russia. And so this Koenig guy, he's a renowned marksman. He's head of the German army school. He lures Vasily into a trap and takes out two of his fellow snipers, but Vasily manages to get away, of course. When the Red Army command learns of Koenig's mission, they dispatch his former student Kulikov, played by Ron Perlman, rocking a set of silver dentures to help Vasily kill him. However, Koenig tricks Kulikov into revealing his position and kills him, which obviously Vasily is quite upset about. And then Khrushchev pressures Danilov to bring the sniper standoff to a conclusion. He's like, look, I'm tired of hearing about this Koenig guy. If Vasily can't deal with him, someone has to deal with him. Like, just get it done. I don't know if the real Kulikov had the silver dentures, but there was a few guys who supposedly were walking around with these. And the little story that he tells about how he came back to Russia after he was fighting in Germany, I think, and then the Soviet regime was like, "You're suspicious now," and knocked all his teeth out, so he had to get silver dentures. That is based on something that happened to a real person per the Craig book. Yeah,
Wild.
just a neat little window into the fact that you can risk your life for the Soviet regime and they might still kill you after or beat you up at least. This whole plot line with Connie, this is like the crux of the movie. And it's super weird because the Craig book talks about this like it's real, with no mention that it could be Russian propaganda. Zaitsev talks about it in his diaries and in the autobiography he published in 1956, but there's no record of a sniper by that name in the German army. And you would think if he had over 400 kills, as they say, he would be decorated and probably subject to some nationalistic propaganda of his own. I mean, the German sniper that we know of, who has the most kills from World War II, has like 300 something. So if there was a guy who was better than him, like you would think we would have heard of it. Some people think that he might have existed, but the Germans, fearing that it would be a big morale blow if people heard about it, scrubbed the records about him. But we know for a fact that the Russians invented a sniper who had been sent to kill legendary Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko. So the idea of the regime making all of this up wouldn't be without precedent either.
No, I know that a lot of records are no longer available in Germany, like a lot of it's been destroyed, but still, if it's something this big, you'd think that somebody somewhere would talk, even if things got lost.
Yeah, and the historian I was talking about earlier, Anthony Beevor, was talking about how, like, he's done years of research into this, and he's like, there was no sniper school. The Germans did establish a sniper school, but it was not until Stalingrad was already underway. So it's not like they would have this super sniper who had all this experience running a sniper school, and that's why they brought him in. And he wasn't able to find anyone by this name. And also, apparently, in Zaitsev's memoir, he accidentally calls this guy by a different name later in the book. And then the different name that he uses also isn't the name of anyone who was in the German army. So I think that it's possible that Zaitsev, I mean, he did supposedly kill, I think, 11 snipers at Stalingrad. So I think it's possible that he did face off against some guys who were pretty good. But this whole thing about how this guy is a super sniper and he's the best the German army has ever seen, like that seems incorrect.
Yeah, and especially since he became such a figure of propaganda for the Soviets, like.
Yeah,
It wouldn't
for
be all
sure.
that surprising.
At the Based on a True Story podcast I listened to, the guy mentioned that, like, König is the German word for king, so he's like, maybe this guy is more of a symbol than a real person.
When Tanya requests to be reassigned to the sniper division because she wants to get in on the action because she's actually quite good, Danilov asks Vasily to discourage her from that, and Vasily attempts to do so, but then relents when Tanya tells him how her Hebrew parents were murdered by the Germans. So he's like, at first he's trying, and then he's like, oh wait, she's got actual cause to want to fight, so I'm not gonna try anymore. And also maybe he'll lecture a little bit.
Danilov recruits a young local boy, Sasha Filipov, played by Gabriel Thompson, who idolizes Vasily, and he's doing small jobs for the Germans in exchange for food, but he's also acting as a double agent. So he's in there like polishing Konig's shoes, and in the meantime, he's passing him false information about Vasily's whereabouts to give Vasily a chance to ambush this guy. Sasha is a real person. He offered to repair the Germans' footwear. He did this of his own volition. No one told him to do it. And he would take information that he heard back to the Russians. And he was 15 when the Germans hanged him for espionage.
Whenever there's a kid in a movie like this, I'm like, oh no, the kid is gonna die.
Yeah.
Vasily sets a trap for Koenig after obviously he's heard some information from Sasha, and he manages to wound him, but during a second attempt, when he's kind of laying outside to try and catch this guy, he falls asleep, but did he fall asleep? Or is he playing dead? We don't really know. I thought he fell asleep, but Sam isn't sure, I think.
It's just so noisy. And like I don't know. To me, it looked like he was playing dead, but I don't know.
I thought he fell asleep for like a minute and missed Koenig, and then after that, when there's the German guy picking up stuff, he is actually playing dead because otherwise he would get shot. So that's my interpretation of the scene. But then, as he's playing dead, his sniper log is taken by a looting German soldier, and the German command then takes this as evidence that Vasily's no longer alive. And so there is no reason to keep Koenig there, and they want to send him home, but he doesn't want to go home because he does not believe that Vasily is dead. And it's a whole thing.
Yeah, Sasha is gutted because he thinks that Vasily is dead, and Koning's like, "Well, you don't have to be sad. You know how I know he's not dead? Because I haven't killed him yet."
Imagine being that sure of yourself.
Well, yeah. General Friedrich Paulus, played by Matthias Habisch, confiscates Konig's dog tags to prevent Soviet propaganda from profiting if Konig is killed and identified. In turn, Konig gives the general a War Merit Cross that was posthumously awarded to his son, a lieutenant who was killed in the early days of the battle. Just like a little moment of, I guess, trying to invoke some sympathy for this bad dude before we go see him do like a whole bunch of heinous shit.
Too late, movie. Too late.
Paulus gets about 2 seconds of airtime in this movie, but he's a major figure in Craig's book. He commanded the Sixth Army throughout the battle, and initially the German advance was strong. They swept into Stalingrad and pushed the Russians effectively back to the river. But the Soviets counterattacked and they were able to encircle him. His troops ultimately held more than 90% of the city of Stalingrad and then a pocket that was about 20 miles by 30 miles of the surrounding area. And initially, Hitler sent some other units to relieve him. They couldn't break through, and he's getting supplies by air, but there's just no way. The Luftwaffe don't have enough planes to bring the 700 tons a day of supplies that an army that size needs, right? And so Goering's promise that the Luftwaffe can deliver sufficient supplies, this turns out not to be true. It's just something that Goering said to ingratiate himself with Hitler. And so they start running out of supplies and they're out of ammunition. They're out of food. They're, not having a great time. And Paulus is like, well, how about we try and break out and meet up with the other army? And Hitler's like, no, you're not allowed to do that. I want you to hold the line and stay where you are. So he's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, aka Hitler and a few 100,000 Soviets. And the Germans, starving to death, were ultimately overrun, and Paulus surrendered on January 31st, 1943. Yeah, Hitler was pretty mad about that.
I bet. We are getting so much Hammer Goering in the past few months of doing this podcast. And there's more coming up too, which I think, was this guy just everywhere? I guess he was, but
He did. He did have many titles. It's true.
Koenig tells Sasha where he will be next because he suspects that Sasha will tell Vasily. and he's not wrong. Tanya and Vasily have meanwhile fallen in love, and that night Tanya actually in secret goes to the Soviet barracks. And they smash in between other soldiers in the most uncomfortable scene I've ever seen in my life, and I would like to scroll it from my memory, please.
Y'all,
I don't know who thought this was a good idea, this scene. It's like, it's not romantic, it looks painful, it looks gross and dirty, and please never do this again. Thanks.
ugh, and you just know that, like, guaranteed at least one of the guys around them is just pretending to be asleep and is just listening to them make grunting noises at each other.
And because this movie is a box office movie, Danilov gets very jealous and he disparages Vasily in a letter to his superiors, which is a very mature thing to do.
Yeah, also, like, I don't think Tanya has given any indication that she is interested in smashing Danilov, so he's been thoroughly friend-zoned and he's just mad about it. Well, Koenig spots Tanya and Vasily waiting for him at his next ambush, which confirms his suspicions that Sasha is passing information to them. He kind of set him up, really. And he kills Sasha and hangs his body from a pole. Tanya sees it. She's extremely upset. Everyone's mad. Vasily vows to kill Koenig and sends Tanya and Danilov to evacuate Sasha's mother, played by Ava Mattis, from the city. But as they do so, Tanya is wounded by shrapnel en route to the evacuation boats.
And everybody thinks she's dead, including Danilov, who's then kind of feeling a bit sorry that he was jealous. And because he wants to feel better, I think, he finds Vasily on his way to ambush Koenig. And because he wants to feel better again, he decides to kind of stick his head up to reveal himself to Koenig. That way Vasily can see where Koenig is because Koenig shoots Danilov. And I was a little bit sad about it because apart from the love triangle, which I didn't love, I did like a good friendship and didn't like that he had to die. But anyway, Koenig then thinks he's killed Vasily because he's killed someone and the only person he can imagine to be out there is Vasily. So he goes to inspect the body, but he realizes too late that he has fallen into Vasily's trap. Or not really his trap, but he's fallen into a trap. And Vasily kind of sees him and they do a little stare down. And then when he turns to face Vasily, he shoots him in the face and kills him.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I knew it was coming, but I still kind of jumped. Like, I was startled when the gunshot went off. I don't know if it was because it was so eerily quiet before that. Like, there wasn't really any music or anything.
Yeah, I don't remember, to be honest. I watched this movie in 3 days. I didn't watch it all at once. Probably because I didn't find it very good.
There was a real political agitator named Danilov. First of all, we don't know 100% if he was real. He's mentioned in the Craig book, but there's a few things that came from Zaitsev's memoirs that, like, we don't have any way to prove. Like, we don't know if this guy was real. But according to the Craig book, he was real. And according to the Craig book, what happened was that Zaitsev was on the third morning of doing recon on this Koenig guy. He was in the same spot. He's there with his fellow sniper and spotter Kulikov, the Ron Perlman character who did not die. And they're on their third morning and they're just watching and trying to keep an eye on this spot where they think that Koenig is. And Danilov is just this guy who shows up and he's like, "Hey, like, what are you doing, bro? Can I come hang out?" At one point, Danilov thinks that he sees Koenig and he's like, "Oh, he's over there." And he like jumps up to point him out and then he gets his ass shot, of course, immediately. But he does not die. He's just wounded. Then Zaitsev and Kulikov did supposedly, after this had happened, trick Koenig into raising his head. Once they figured out where he was, Kulikov pretended to get shot. Like he was like, "Oh no, I've been hit." And then when Koenig raised his head to check out the situation, that's when Zaitsev shot him.
I would like to applaud you for your voices today. They're excellent.
I mean, again, the only place where any of this is mentioned is in Zaitsev's memoir, so it could completely be a fabrication of his imagination. But I do think that even if Koenig isn't real, I think perhaps there is a kernel of truth in this. Like, this situation, more or less, might have happened with a sniper that he faced off against.
I mean, sure, because snipers are hard to find and you have to suss them out to kill them. So I do like the way the movie makes you feel how difficult it is to kill this guy. And also, they do make Zaitsev seem kind of impressive. So I like that about the movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, regardless of which parts of this or his story were kind of zhuzhed up for propaganda, it's undeniable that he was really good at killing dudes.
Which is very handy in a war.
Yeah. 2 months later, after Stalingrad has been liberated and the German forces have surrendered, Vasily finds Tanya recovering in a field hospital and they reunite.
I do like this ending because they don't get all sappy at the end. It kind of zooms out, you just see the entirety of the hospital, and you don't see them anymore. You just see him spot her and her spot him, and then it kind of zooms out very slowly, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's hopeful, even though you don't know ultimately what will happen. There's some hope. And I think that also kind of probably captures what the moon was like after the Battle of Stalingrad for the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, imagine having lost 1.3 million people and then having to go on because the war wasn't over.
Real Tanya did get wounded in the stomach, I believe, like you see in the movie. And she was recuperating in the hospital. And they told her that Zaitsev had died. And it is true that he stepped on a landmine and was temporarily blinded, but he recovered enough to return to the front. He continued to teach other snipers, etc. According to the Craig book, many years later, she found out that he had survived the war and married someone else. But also, like I said earlier, there's no mention of her in Zaitsev's memoirs, so either he's trying to cover up a relationship that went bad, or she was a little bit of, the historian I mentioned earlier, Beaver, called her a fantasist, so it's possible that she made some of this stuff up, you know?
Tell me about how awesome Zaitsev is, please.
Well, he's credited with between 144 and 232 kills at Stalingrad. There's a figure given in the Craig book. There's a different figure given everywhere I looked was like a different number. There's just it's hard to confirm kills, I think, in a situation like that. Also, of course, he's probably motivated to increase his kill count. The Soviet government is probably motivated to increase his kill count. And on the other side, there's probably people who are motivated to decrease his kill count. So it's somewhere in that window. It's still a fuck ass load of guys. He was still a hell of a sniper. The Battle of Stalingrad, even though he went on to fight on other battlefronts, I think that one really stuck with him. And he lived the rest of his life in Ukraine, but he asked to be buried in Stalingrad after his death in 1991. So he is there to this day.
Wow. To be honest, watching the movie, if I had not seen the fact that it was based on a true story, I don't know if I would have thought it was based on a true story because it's just such a, I don't know, such a weird, specifically narrow story. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's definitely got like, I don't know, maybe gladiator vibes, where they do all this work, all this set dressing to make you understand that you're watching a historical picture, but they take a lot of artistic license and they really try and mold it into the type of storyline that they think that your average audience is going to want to see when they go to the movies.
Yeah, and Zaitsev, I feel Vasily is such a stereotype too, because he's a reluctant hero. He doesn't want to be the hero. He just wants to like fight and get back to his unit. And he doesn't even want to be a sniper, I think, in the beginning. And it's such a like a Hollywood stereotype too.
Yeah, I guess it's nice to see a Western studio give some credit to a Soviet war hero at a time when,
Yeah,
in the last 80 years, the Western relationship with the Soviet Union has been a little tense.
rocky, I would say. Yes,
Yeah.
and they didn't do any cringe-worthy accents in this. They were very just English.
Yeah, which I did enjoy because I'm like, I don't really need to watch Jude Law try and act an accent. Like, just let him have his regular voice, please. Well, we're gonna rate this movie combat zones, more like friend zones, out of 10 because of the love triangle. But before we do that, you should rate us 5 stars and follow us wherever you get your podcasts because that would be great.
Thank you, and send this episode to your friends too, because they need to know more about Stalingrad for sure.
Of course, force everyone around you to learn about Stalingrad. Tell them all about the Germans eating their horses. How many combat zones, more like friend zones, out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would rate this movie, 5.5. comment zones, more like friend zones out of 10. Because, like I said, I watched it in 3 days, which doesn't speak too well for the movie. I didn't care too much about anyone. I didn't really enjoy the pacing. I don't know, I just didn't like it very much. And I just wish it had been slightly more informative of what happened in Stalingrad. Instead of just showing Stalingrad and lots of dead bodies, I would have. Normally, I find strategy quite boring, but this movie kind of suffered from not having enough strategy talk, so I would have liked a little bit more. And yeah, I don't think I'm ever gonna watch it again. I did enjoy Joseph Fiennes. I thought he was good, but that's because I had a crush on him when I was younger. So that's why.
Oh gosh. Well, I think this movie, if you think of it in the sense of like they're telling this very tiny subplot from the battle focused on this one guy just against the backdrop of what was happening in Stalingrad generally, and like the battle itself is less important than as like set dressing, then I think it's all right. Like you, I would have preferred more context. I did like the set that they built. I thought they did a good job of making it appear like fucking Judgment Day, you know? Like 99% of the buildings have been knocked down, but, yeah, I don't know. Weak characterization for the most part. It's hard to care about these characters very much, but it was cool to learn a little bit about the Eastern Front. So I think I'm gonna rate it a 5. Combat zones, more like friend zones out of 10. I don't think it's terrible. There was some cool, like, combat scenes during the movie that I liked. It was cool to see how snipers operate and that kinda stuff. It's, because there's lots of things that you wouldn't think of. But yeah, I don't know. Nothing to write home about, I suppose.
I would like to amend my rating. Well, not my rating, but my explanation of the rating. And I would like to say that I really thought Ed Harris was very scary.
He was good. I'll agree he was good. Are you reading anything?
I am reading The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan, who also wrote A Bridge Too Far. And I'm not that far in yet. I think I've read like 70 pages or something. But the writing style is so interesting because it makes you feel like you are there as it's happening. It's really an interesting way of retelling history because I think his sources are very good and even some of the dialogue is real, but everything around it just reads like a novel. It's quite nice.
Yeah, Ryan is really good. It's such a shame, I think he died young-ish, like, he had a heart attack at, like, age 50 or something. An undertaking like The Longest Day or A Bridge Too Far, he would do, like, 5 years of research. So, it's just a pity that we don't have more from him because he's such a good writer.
And in the book, I mean, D-Day has not begun yet, and he's already given me 5 different perspectives of it, the lead up to D-Day, and it's so interesting to get. You get a German perspective, and then you get a submariner's perspective, and it's so interesting to have all these little bits and pieces and how they all fit together, and I'm just really excited to read the rest.
Yeah, I'm excited to read that one too.
Because there's a movie. That's why we're reading it. And also because he's good. What are you reading? Are you reading anything new?
Well, I cranked through, like, probably 80% of Enemy at the Gates this weekend, so I'm done that now, and I'm just starting this book that I just recently bought. It's, like, basically on the bestseller list right now. It's called The Girl Bandits of the Warsaw Ghetto by Elizabeth R. Hyman, and, yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading about some ladies being kick-ass during World War II.
They need to make a movie for us to watch.
I would love to watch the movie,
Yeah, but I'm guessing it's too new for there to be a movie anytime soon.
for sure, yeah.
Shame. Anyway, I think that's it. At least for me. Do you have anything else you want to talk about today? No? I do want to say I was supposed to be in Sicily this weekend, and I didn't get to go because of health reasons, but our friend and SAS correspondent George was there, and they wore their Rosie the Reviewer t-shirt, and my friend Dan also wore his cap, so we were a little bit in Sicily this weekend, which
Yay!
was nice. Anyway, that's it for another week of Rosie the Reviewer. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars, as we've already told you. You can send this episode to a friend who likes questionable love triangles that did not exist in real life. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, where I will also link to that podcast episode that Sam mentioned, so you can listen to it. Alright, see you next week!
Bye.